5 Steps to Recovering from an Algorithm Penalty with Rad Palushak. The In Search SEO Podcast is brought to you by Similarweb, helping you build better SEO strategies with digital intelligence, insights, and data. Hey, it's David. What do you do when your rankings suddenly dive and you may be facing an algorithm penalty? That's what we're talking about today with a specialist in technical SEO and organic search, who's also a software developer and IT architect who simply loves simplifying things, especially SEO. He currently runs a global SEO agency focusing on technical auditing and consultations, as well as providing programmatic SEO strategies. A warm welcome to the In Search SEO Podcast, CTO and co-founder at Non-Agency, Rad Palushak.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me, David.
Hey Rad, thanks so much for coming on. Well, you can find Rad over at non.agency. Love the brand name, Rad.
Thank you very much.
So, Rad, how do you know that a site is suffering from an algorithm penalty?
Well, first and foremost, you will lose a lot of traffic pretty much overnight or over a very short period of time. And if you check tools, mainly Google Search Console, where there's this little section for manual penalty, you check it and it says there's nothing wrong with the site, no issues, I think it says exactly. Then if it wasn't a manual penalty, you know this is probably caused by an algorithmic penalty. Just one nuance, literal nuance that I like to point out. Personally, I don't often use the word penalty. We will probably dig into that a little bit more in a second, but I prefer to call it a devaluation of the site because it's not really a penalty for something you have or have not done.
So are there different types of algorithm devaluations?
Well, apparently so. Obviously, you can have many different things in the algorithm, many signals that the algorithm is looking at, and obviously it can look at them, analyze them, and then devalue your site based on those signals. And something that we usually use distinction within algorithmic devaluations is it's either link related, which we are seeing less and less often at the moment, and I treat it as all the rest, basically. So the devaluations that come from mixture, like a soup of different signals that usually boil down to a core algorithm devaluation or something related to helpful content update.
And today, obviously, you're sharing 5 steps to recovering from an algorithm penalty / devaluation. I mean, just before we get into that, this soup of possibilities that you're talking about there, is it useful to try to identify what the issue is, and also how long can you face in the doldrums and the devaluation period before you can recover from it?
Yes, well, of course, it's valuable to try to at least identify what could cause the devaluation / penalty. Because obviously we're going to mix those words. It's fine. I just prefer using devaluation for specificity, but penalty is fine. So like I said, it's of course it's useful to try to find some culprits that affected you. However, more often than not, as we both mentioned now, the soup of whatever is happening and in Google algorithm and in the mix of the signals that Google is analyzing, it's usually not a one thing that you would just go after. But I think we're going slightly into the steps.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fine. We can go over the specific steps, but I like the word soup as well because it emphasizes that things are a melange. They're a mixture of so many different things. It's not necessarily just the one thing that is impacting things, your devaluation. So your step number 1 is gather the data.
Yeah, sorry, I just laughed a little bit when, when I actually said soup, because we already have the term algorithmic sandwich, where Google is stacking few updates on one on the other, which is a sandwich. Now we have another culinary term that is a soup. But hey.
You're thinking of incorporating this in a speech, aren't you? You're thinking, this could be quite a good speech. Google soup.
Maybe, perhaps, yeah. But okay, another little joke that I wanted to make is that we could actually end up with just 3 steps. That would be gather the data, analyze the data, and then recover your traffic. But it's like with this drawing where you draw a face and it says, oh, first step, draw an oval, second step, draw eyes, third step, draw the rest of the face, right? It's not actually that simple. So, and I think you guys listening to this podcast should start with gathering the data, because, well, what can you do without the data? The thing here is not in particular that much, but agencies have some advantages in this area, as in gathering the data, because obviously they have access to a lot of clients. So if some websites of their clients got affected by the devaluation, then obviously they can probably see a much broader perspective. So a hint to non-agency people who are listening to us, try to get data for different websites that were affected. If you don't have access to that, ask your friends, some colleagues that you might know, some people you might know, or if not, you can go to Twitter or Reddit, and usually there are people complaining that they got affected, and quite often they actually share their URL, so you can analyze that as broad as possible.
So what data are we talking about here? Are we, for instance, looking at keyword rankings and historical keyword rankings, see how that's changed over time, and then comparing and contrasting with how the overall category and other websites within the category has changed over time?
Yeah, in a way, what I like to do is, obviously you're starting with keywords because your traffic is usually based on rankings that your keywords have. But what I like to do, instead of focusing on keywords, I actually, and this, by the way, you can use any tools. I like to use Google Search Console, which is probably the best, but if you're working on someone else's website, you don't have access to Google Search Console. So you can use Similarweb or any other tool. And I specifically, instead of looking at individual keywords, I look at the URLs and then compare them from the day or a few days after the devaluation affected you.
So you're looking for organic traffic to the URLs?
Yes, absolutely. Because it allows you to prioritize your work better. If you look at individual keywords, one URL can rank for like 1,000 keywords sometimes, right? So you will basically have to go through a lot more data. Obviously, this is to allow you to prioritize better. You look at the URLs, you have clear contenders that were affected the most on your website. And that gives you an idea of what you should start analyzing first. And then obviously, after you identify the set of URLs, you start looking at the keywords, you start looking at those particular URLs. But I think this is already tapping onto the second step.
Yeah, analyze the data.
Analyze the data. Yes, exactly. So when you have those URLs, have a look what overtook them in Google search results, because obviously that will also tell you what happened, what other URLs, what other websites are better than your own. But, and this is something I can't stress enough, try to learn when you're while you're analyzing your competitors, comparing your URLs to some other sites, try not to only look at those ones that ranked higher than you, but also look at those that also lost rankings along the way. Because again, this is you gathering data and looking at more URL, and basically through looking at more URLs, you will eventually start finding some patterns, finding some similarities between your site's URLs versus those sites that overtook you, and then versus those sites that lost as much as you or even more. It's all basically the comparison game. So what I'm doing, I usually put all my data in terms of URLs, in terms of keywords, in a big master spreadsheet, as I like to say, and I start looking at everything. Obviously, you have to have a little bit of SEO knowledge to identify what might be similar between those URLs, or might be different if you're comparing losers versus winners. But essentially, from that long process, it will probably take you several hours. You will end up, and if you're like me, take every single note that just crosses your mind. So you're looking at one site, the other site, and you're like, both of these sites don't have any interactive elements in the content, for example, right? Just jot it down, because it will be helpful later when you're actually trying to make some conclusions, to look at those notes and basically form some opinions based on those.
And step number 3 is conclude your findings and create this strategy.
Yes, exactly. So, like I said, I'm noting everything. I'm jotting down everything, all small thoughts. Then when I take them, I actually, the more I analyze, the more URLs I look at, I actually try to prioritize things that I keep seeing that are repeating. So I just copy paste them at the top of the notebook that I'm taking, or the set of notes that I'm taking, and then I actually leave it. I leave it for a few hours or until the next day, because I want to have a breather. I want to take a step back, because if you're into something, you stop seeing. You're seeing too close. You're too close to it. But then when you take a breather, next day you sit down, you still remember everything that you saw on the websites, because it just keeps coming back to you. You're reading your notes, and you're starting to form more conclusions, more firm opinions on what those things that affected you could have been.
And taking them together, steps 4 and 5 are implement and follow up.
Yes, implement and follow up. So I don't think there's much to do about the implementation. Basically, you take your notes from the strategy when you're concluding your findings. I would particularly like to point out to the direction of helpful content update, because this one is particularly tricky. Google isn't very specific, it's very general in suggesting what helpful content is, but there's a couple of things that you can drive from Google's advice, and they say, in short, among all the other questions that they're asking you to ask yourself about your site, they're saying, think about the user, not the search engine. Create clear purpose for your site, for your content, and make sure that you have added value offering, something that your site offers as an added value. And as you can see, it's very general still, right? So when you're making the conclusions after you're fighting against helpful content update affecting your site, you will go pretty broad with your thoughts, with your strategy. For that reason, and now when it comes to implementation, if you overthink what to implement, what not, if you're stuck on thinking, oh, is this even helpful? It probably means that it might not be. On the other hand, when you're thinking of something that is on your site, but you've not seen on the competitors, or you've seen competitors are doing better, in your opinion, and you're considering whether to implement it, then the answer is already probably yes, since you're already like, if it gave you this idea. The point I'm trying to make here is, don't overthink it. It's better to just go and do something if you have the resources than leave it out. Because again, especially when it comes to helpful content update, it can take months before you will see that the devaluation is releasing you. Google is expecting, not Google itself, but the classifier that is built to the algorithm that is responsible for helpful content update is expecting you to prove over a prolonged period of time that your content is really helpful after the changes, right? So it will take probably several months. I think Google mentioned several months at least in some of the recent Twitter threads. So that's going to take a long time. And if you leave something on the table, if you've not nailed it, because it's in a way guessing, your strategy is guessing. Obviously, you have a lot of data and stuff and conclusions, but it's still guessing, right? So you have to be pretty broad and good and particularly well executed. You have to particularly execute the strategy well in order to be more sure that after that period of time that Google expects you to prove your helpfulness, the evaluation will actually release you. Because if you leave a lot of things out by thinking, oh, should I not do it, then there's a high chance that Google will not release you. And that's obviously pretty bad.
And what do you mean by follow-up?
Okay, so what I mean by follow-up, sometimes it takes a short period of time for you to end your devaluation because you fixed something, the classifier re-ranked or re-indexed your site, and boom, it starts releasing your rankings start to be coming back. That's the easiest and the most unlikely thing to happen, unfortunately, because Google usually takes a longer time. However, like I said, Google also is built on those systems that use classifiers where classifier might test you for some period of time. So in a way, if you observe and take action based on your observations, then that's my follow-up. Also, once you implemented or your changes, your rankings have not come back, then you probably need to go back to analyzing the data again, concluding findings, the implementation, and so on and so forth. So it's sort of a circular process.
Brilliant. Let's finish off with
the Pareto pickle.
Pareto says you can get 80% of your results from 20% of your efforts. What's one SEO activity that you would recommend that provides incredible results for modest levels of effort?
So I would cover it in one word, navigation, because in my opinion, navigation is one, obviously a broad term, but one of the biggest influences on your rankings. If you ensure that Google can get to your important pages, they are interlinked correctly, they have links in the menu in other important places on the website, in, let's say, featured posts or frequently come up as related posts, then that is a big signal to Google that this content is important. Google will probably help it rank a bit higher because obviously it just keeps finding it. So in my opinion, focusing a lot on navigation, which usually is just coming up with places and ways where to include your important links or links to your important pages, is like one of the biggest winners.
I've been your host, David Bain. You can find Rad Palushak over at non.agency. Rad, thanks so much for being on the In Search SEO podcast.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
And thank you for listening. Check out all the previous episodes and sign up for a free trial of the Similarweb platform over at similarweb.com.